I had been on the road for what felt like forever, at least 2 hours behind the wheel, headed toward the Marriott Hotel in Richmond. My wife, Ava, was there for some conference, and I figured I'd surprise her with a nice dinner. But honestly, that wasn't the only reason I was making the trip. For the past 3 months, something had been eating at me. I could not shake this heavy feeling that Ava might be seeing another man. Every time she went on one of these business trips or training sessions, she always seemed to get home later than she said she would. And tonight, I had finally had enough. I needed answers, and I was ready to face whatever truth I found, even if it hurt. Ava and I have been married for 14 years, and we've got 2 great kids. Our daughter, Nina, is 12, and our son, John, just turned 10. They were spending the night with my mom, so I could make this unexpected visit. Ava and I got married fresh out of high school. We had been together for a couple of years before tying the knot. Back then, she was full of life, always smiling, with long brown hair and a figure that definitely caught attention. But lately, something had shifted. I could not explain it exactly. It was just small things that made me feel unsettled. I didn't want to seem jealous or irrational, so I kept it all bottled up. Since this conference wasn't too far away, I figured this was my chance to drop in and see what was really going on. When I arrived at the hotel, I handed off my suit bag at the front desk and introduced myself. Liam Davis, I said. My wife, Ava, is attending the insurance conference. She told me to stop by and said I could get a room key from the front desk. The clerk asked for some identification, checked my story, and eventually handed over the key. My hands were already sweating as I stepped into the elevator. My thoughts were racing. What if I walked in and she was not alone? Should I knock? Should I just use the key? How would I handle it? I walked down the hallway toward room 214, heart pounding the whole way. When I reached the door, I slid the key card in slowly, trying to stay quiet. I opened the door just enough to peek in. And there she was, sitting at the little desk, briefcase open, sorting through a stack of papers. She turned to see me and looked surprised, but not panicked. I told her I had some free time and thought I would come by and take her out to dinner. She lit up and gave me a big smile, said she was glad I came, and told me I should stay the night. She came over, threw her arms around me, and gave me a long kiss. Right then, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had worked myself up over nothing. I made a light joke about how we could spend a little time together before dinner, and she gave me this playful grin. She said we could have a quick, private moment before she hopped in the shower and promised a full night of whatever I wanted after that. It felt like a relief. I told myself I was just being paranoid. We had a short but passionate moment together, and then Ava disappeared into the bathroom to take her shower. I sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to calm my nerves. My head was still spinning from the long drive. That was when I noticed her toiletry bag sitting on the dresser. I figured I would grab a couple of aspirin. My head was pounding from all the stress and thinking. But when I opened her bag, I did not find any aspirin. Instead, I found something that turned my stomach, a box of 6 condoms. I just froze. Ava had been on birth control pills after John was born, but they made her feel sick. That is when I decided to get a vasectomy, so we would not need any kind of protection anymore. We had not used condoms in years. So why were they there? The answer hit me like a punch to the chest. She was cheating. There was no other way to explain it. My hands were shaking as I put the box back in place. My mind was spinning out of control. I had no idea what to do next. I sat there, going over my options, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. Then, I did something I am not proud of. I searched through her bag until I found a small safety pin. Ava always kept one for fashion emergencies. I took that pin and carefully poked a hole right in the center of every single condom. Then I slipped them back exactly how I found them. While Ava was still in the shower, I pulled out my phone and called my buddy, Ben. He's the kind of friend who never asks too many questions. I told him I needed a quick favor, just a phone call. I asked him to call me in about an hour and pretend there was some kind of emergency back home. Something believable, like a burst water pipe at the school or something that needed my attention right away. Ben did not even hesitate. He said he would call around 7. There was no way I was going to spend the night with Ava, not after what I had just seen. The idea of getting close to her again made my skin crawl. I figured I would let Ben's call be my way out and use the long drive home to sort through everything in my head. When Ava finally came out of the bathroom, I could barely make eye contact. Every part of me wanted to ask her straight up, to demand the truth. But I knew blowing up right then would not help anything. I needed to think. We went downstairs to the hotel restaurant, and I did my best to act like everything was fine. Meanwhile, Inside, I felt like I was falling apart. Ava smiled across the table at me like nothing was wrong. She had no idea what I had just found, or what I was planning next. I told Ava to go ahead and order whatever sounded good, but she just gave a little shrug and said she was not all that hungry. She ended up picking a small filet mignon and suggested we split a bottle of rose with dinner. After the waiter walked off, I could not help myself. I had to test the waters a little, just to see if I was imagining things. I asked her straight out if she was happy in our marriage. She did not even hesitate. Said yes, without a flicker of doubt. She started going on about how lucky we were, nice house, 2 amazing kids, and a husband who adored her. She said she could not ask for more. I nodded, trying to keep a straight face, but inside her words just about knocked the wind out of me. How could she say all that when she was clearly sneaking around behind my back? I told her sometimes I wondered if I was doing enough, if I was holding up my end of things, but that I never stopped feeling grateful to be her husband. I even threw in a joke, said there were days I had to pinch myself just to believe she was really mine. Ava chuckled and called me a silly goose. She said that was probably why I had made the long drive just to see her, and that I should not worry, she was happy and content. Our food came, and we ate while making light conversation, but my mind was miles away. No matter how hard I tried, I could not stop thinking about what I had found in her toiletry bag. Then, right as our plates were being cleared, my phone buzzed. Right on cue, it was Ben. I excused myself and stepped out into the lobby, letting the phone ring a few times before I answered, just to make it seem believable. We went through the whole routine: emergency at the school, burst water pipe, needed my attention right away. I thanked him and hung up, took a breath, and went back to the table. I told Ava I had to leave, that there was a plumbing issue back home at the school and they needed me to come check it out. Her expression dropped a little. I could not tell if she was genuinely disappointed or just irritated that her evening plans were getting cut short. Either way, it felt like my leaving did not mean all that much to her. As we headed toward the elevators, a guy I had never seen before stepped out and immediately greeted Ava like they were old friends. He said his name was Peter Miller and mentioned he had stopped by her room earlier, but no one had answered. He held out his hand to me and said, "Ava talks about you all the time." "I am Peter." I forced a smile and shook his hand, though my stomach twisted the moment we made contact. This had to be the guy. This was the one she was sleeping with. Back in the room, I finally broke. I looked her in the eye and told her I wanted her to quit her job. I just could not stand the thought of her spending every day around Peter anymore. We had danced around the subject before, but now I made it clear it was not up for debate. She got defensive fast, said she was not quitting her job and that I needed to stop being paranoid. She acted like I was the one creating problems out of thin air. After that, she gave me a cold, half-hearted kiss, and I picked up my bags and walked out. I was burning with rage and heartache. The whole ride home, all I could picture was Peter at her hotel room door, probably expecting something more than just friendly conversation. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was wrecked, emotionally drained. I hated what she was doing to us, and I hated myself for not being able to stop it. Divorce was the only word echoing in my head, but I felt helpless without hard proof. Deep down, I knew the truth: my wife was cheating, but I had nothing concrete to act on. 2 days later, Ava came home from the conference acting like everything was sunshine and roses. She was cheerful, chatty, almost too much. It only made my blood boil more. I could not just sit on it anymore. While she was unpacking her suitcase, I slipped over to check her bag again. And there it was, one last condom from the pack. Still had the tiny pinhole I had poked through it. That meant she had used the rest. In just a couple of days, my stomach turned. That weekend, her company, Liberty Insurance, put on a picnic for all the employees and their families. The kids were excited, but I had no interest in going. I had this gut feeling some of her coworkers knew what was going on, and I was not in the mood to be the butt of some inside joke or whispered gossip. Still, I went for the kids. Ava was in her element that day. She was all smiles, laughing, talking with her coworkers, and yes, with Peter too. They were not being obvious, but there was something between them. A closeness. Like everyone else faded into the background when they were around each other. I stayed in the background, trying to keep to myself. Then a woman I had never met walked up and introduced herself. Said her name was Olivia Miller, Peter's wife. She was stunning. Long auburn hair, piercing blue eyes. Honestly, she looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. For a moment, I just stood there confused. This guy was married? To her? How could Peter cheat on someone like that? I had always loved Ava, still did in some messed up way, but Olivia was on another level. We exchanged a few polite words, nothing too deep. But eventually we agreed to find a quieter spot to talk. We wandered off to a bench near the lake, far enough from the noise of the picnic crowd that we could talk in private. I could tell right away that something was weighing heavy on Olivia's mind. She sat there quietly, like she was trying to find the right words, but they just would not come out. So I figured I would help her along a little. I went ahead and told her that I had found out about the affair earlier that week. The change in her face was instant, like a burden had been lifted. She let out a sigh and admitted that she had known for about 2 months already. Said she had made up her mind to go through with a divorce, even hired a private investigator to dig up evidence. Her lawyer, she explained, had recommended that she ask Ava to testify, or at the very least, sign a sworn statement, something official to help build a stronger case. I asked what kind of proof she had so far, and she said she had photographs, recorded phone calls, and some documentation, but no video footage yet. Still, she felt confident it was more than enough to stand up in court. Then she looked me straight in the eye and asked if I would be willing to use some of that same evidence for my own divorce. She also told me she planned to take legal action against Liberty Insurance for negligence, since she had statements from coworkers who knew about the affair but chose to keep quiet. Olivia was hell-bent on holding both Peter and Ava accountable. She suggested that we join forces, share everything we had, and help each other out. I agreed without much hesitation. It just made sense to work together at that point. Before we headed back to the picnic, she invited me over to her place the following day. Peter was going to be out golfing in the morning, so she figured that would be the perfect time to go over all the material she had gathered. She lived on Hemlock Avenue in Elkton, just a few minutes from where we were that day. We both chuckled a bit. It was not a date or anything, but it felt like we were on the same side now, like we were in this mess together. When we got back to the picnic, it was like nothing had happened. Nobody seemed to notice we had been away. For the first time in a long while, I felt a small bit of hope. Maybe there was still a way to crawl out of the wreckage. The next morning, like clockwork, Ava told me she was heading out to do some shopping and would be gone for a few hours. As soon as she left, I packed the kids up and dropped them off at my mom's house. Then I drove straight over to Olivia's place. She greeted me at the door, calm and collected as always, and led me into her den. The room was warm and inviting, leather couch, soft lighting, and a computer screen on the coffee table. On the monitor was a live feed of an empty motel room. She offered me a drink. I picked a Pepsi and then asked if I was ready for what came next. She explained that we were about to watch Peter's golf outing in real time, and she hinted that I might recognize the caddy walking alongside him. When I asked how she pulled this off, she casually mentioned that it cost her about $1,400 to set everything up, but she figured Peter would end up paying for it in the long run, one way or another. The whole surveillance session was supposed to go on for a couple of hours. Olivia told me to make myself at home. She even had snacks ready. Popcorn, nachos, the whole 9 yards. Said I could even take a copy of the footage home on DVD. She admitted that as much as she dreaded seeing what might happen, she could not bring herself to look away either. For the next 20 minutes, we chatted. She shared more dirt on the affair, pictures, audio recordings, even some paperwork. The more she showed me, the clearer it became Ava and Peter were in this deeper than I ever thought. It tore me up inside, but at least I was finally seeing the truth. Then, just like Olivia said, the screen lit up. There they were, Peter and Ava, walking into that motel room together. They did not waste any time either. Clothes started coming off almost right away. No small talk, no hesitation. Just straight into it. The video quality was solid, but the audio was kind of fuzzy. Still, it was enough. I just sat there, staring in disbelief. That was my wife. Right there. With another man. It was one of the most gut-wrenching things I have ever witnessed. Olivia tried to crack a joke, something about how Ava's body was not something you see every day. I gave her a half-hearted smile, but honestly, I did not know what to say. The whole thing felt unreal. Like I was stuck in someone else's nightmare. After a few minutes, I could not take any more. I turned to Olivia and told her that was enough. I did not need to see another second. She agreed. Said it was painful to watch, even for her. We turned it off. We both knew the lawyers had plenty of ammo now. I told Olivia that sitting there, seeing my wife with another man, while she sat beside me, was almost too much to bear. It felt wrong on every level. She nodded, said she understood, and suggested we take a break from all that ugliness. She offered to show me her koi ponds out back, and I jumped at the chance. That sounded a whole lot better than rewatching that horror show. Her face lit up when I showed interest, and she seemed genuinely happy to talk about something peaceful for once. We walked into the backyard, and I have to say, I was impressed. She had 3 separate koi ponds, and each one was more beautiful than the last. Olivia explained how the pumping and filtration systems worked, and I found myself actually getting into it. I guess my background in plumbing helped, but really, I was just grateful for the distraction. I told Olivia I'd be happy to lend a hand any time she needed it, mostly because I was curious to learn more about those koi ponds. Spending time with her was a bonus, sure, but there was nothing romantic going on between us, not yet anyway. We stayed out there for hours, just talking. And for once, it was not about our lying, cheating spouses. It was peaceful, like I could breathe again. Eventually, we headed back inside. The motel room on her monitor was empty now. Peter and Ava had already come and gone. That meant it was time for me to head home. Olivia walked me to the door and said she'd give me a call next time Peter went golfing. She even suggested I bring the kids, Nina and John, over to see the fish. It was a kind gesture, something to look forward to when everything else in life felt like it was falling apart. On the drive home, I was hit with a weird mix of emotions. There was some relief, sure, but also anger, confusion, and maybe a faint trace of hope that somehow I was going to make it through all this. The weeks that followed were rough. Every time Ava took a shower, I would find myself going through her bag. And every single time, there was a new pack of condoms tucked away. I could not figure out when she was using them all. It felt like she was living a whole other life I was not a part of. I still carried that little safety pin on my keychain, ready to poke holes in every box I found. Petty? Maybe. But I felt like I had to take back some control. Whenever Peter had a golf game scheduled, I would take the kids over to Olivia's place. They absolutely loved it there. Called her the koi lady and would spend hours drawing pictures of the fish. They would proudly show the drawings to Ava when we got back home. And the craziest part? She never had a clue that Olivia was Peter's wife. It was almost funny how clueless she was. Ava even seemed glad I was keeping the kids entertained. Said it gave her time to handle things, whatever that meant. I tried talking to her again a couple times, begging her to quit her job and cut things off with Peter, but she shut me down hard each time. The second time we talked, she was especially cruel. Took some low blows, questioning my manhood, making it sound like all of this was somehow my fault. That hurt, but it also gave me the final push I needed. After that, I stopped trying. I avoided intimacy, made excuses, and felt myself drifting further and further away from her. Then one night, out of the blue, Ava dropped a bomb on me. She said she had been feeling overwhelmed and stressed lately, and she thought it might help if she took a few days off to visit her sister, Sophia. Maybe even stay for a week. She said she figured I could use a break too, with all the overtime I had been putting in lately. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor, like this trip was somehow a gift to me. I nodded and played along, but I did not sleep a wink that night. My mind was racing. I knew it was time. I had to act. The very next day, after Ava left on her so-called rest and recovery trip, I started putting my plan into motion. First, I sat down with my parents and told them everything. Admitted I had failed as a husband and that things were falling apart. They were incredible, kind, supportive, ready to help however they could. The kids were excited to stay at their grandparents' house, and Dad said I could use his old pickup to help move Ava's things out when the time came. That meant one less thing to worry about. On Thursday morning, I got in the truck and drove 3 hours to a clinic I suspected Ava might be using. But I hit a dead end. She was not registered there. That left me with one last shot, the family planning center. I walked in trying to look casual, even though my nerves were shot. I told the receptionist my name was Liam Davis, and that my wife, Ava, had asked me to stop by and sign some consent forms. I acted unsure, told her I was not exactly sure what the paperwork was called, but it had something to do with understanding the procedure and giving up any legal claims. The receptionist nodded, checked her computer, and confirmed Ava's name. She said her sister had already signed for her, but my signature would be even better. She handed me the file, and sure enough, there was Sophia's signature. I added mine right below it. The appointment was set for Friday morning at 11 o'clock, and Ava was supposed to arrive an hour early. I asked if anything still needed to be paid, but the receptionist said it had all been covered, $800, paid in cash. I thanked her and walked out with a knot in my stomach. I had what I needed now, but that did not make it any easier. Later that day, I showed up at Sophia and Bruce's place. The second I walked in, things felt off. Ava looked stunned to see me. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I kept my tone calm and told her the kids were staying with my folks for a few days, and I had taken a little sick leave to come unwind, just like she had. The room went dead silent. I could see it on their faces, panic, scrambling to figure out how to handle the surprise. Sophia gave Bruce a subtle nod, and he slipped into the kitchen with her. Ava tried to act normal, making small talk, but her eyes were darting all over the place. She was nervous, no doubt about it. When Bruce came back, he suggested we borrow his friend James's boat and spend a day out on the lake, said it would help clear our heads. I smiled and agreed, said it sounded perfect. But truthfully, I had no intention of stepping foot on that boat. The next morning, James showed up with the boat as planned. But when the time came, I looked Bruce straight in the eye and made it clear I was not going anywhere. While he was tossing sandwiches into a cooler and stacking in bottles of beer, I just stood there by the passenger side of his truck, hands in my pockets. Bruce looked over at me and asked if I was getting in, but I told him straight up that I had changed my mind. I said I was not going to spend the whole day out on the lake with him and James. It just didn't sit right with me. Instead, I told him to enjoy himself while he could because when he got back, he would be dealing with Sophia, and something told me she would not be in the best mood. Bruce tried to change my mind. He started throwing around a few curses and tossed in some half-hearted threats like he thought that might scare me into going. But I held my ground. After about 5 minutes of him trying and failing to get me in that truck, he finally gave up. He and James pulled out of the driveway without me. As soon as they were gone, I walked back inside the house. I poured myself a cup of coffee, then went ahead and shut off Ava's cell phone. After that, I gave my dad a call. He is an early riser, always has been, and I figured I could use someone to talk to. We stayed on the line for a good 2 hours while I ignored the nonstop buzzing from Ava's phone. I figured Bruce was probably trying to get a hold of Sophia, maybe to give her a heads up, but I was not about to let that happen. Eventually, Ava and Sophia woke up. I told my dad goodbye and braced myself for the mess I knew was coming. Not long after, Sophia's phone buzzed back to life, right when the two of them were supposed to be leaving for their appointment at the family planning center. I finished the last of the coffee and started a fresh pot for them, knowing full well I was about to catch some serious heat. Ava gave me a look, one of those irritated, confused looks, and asked why I was still hanging around. I told her I decided not to go fishing and figured I would spend the day with them instead. I even suggested we grab lunch together since I had to head out later that night anyway. Ava shot that idea down fast. She said they had their own plans and did not want me tagging along. She reminded me that she and Sophia only got to see each other a couple of times a year and that I had the whole week to spend with her. I was not buying it. I pushed back, told her I had come all this way, and the least she could do was spare me a few hours. Sophia, looking ticked off, left the room to make a phone call. Ava sat there, looking totally drained, like the fight had already been sucked out of her. From the kitchen, we could hear Sophia on the phone, yelling at Bruce like he had really messed up by leaving me behind. Ava tried one last time to talk me out of coming along. She said their plans were private and that I would just be in the way. I stayed calm, told her I just wanted to know what they had planned so I could decide whether to join or go do something else. I even joked, asking if they were meeting up with some guys. Ava shut that down quick and said no, it was nothing like that. She told me they were planning to shop for things like bras, underwear, and nightgowns, stuff women do not exactly want a guy tagging along for. I shrugged and said most of those stores were in the mall, so I could easily wander off while they tried on whatever they needed. I even offered to take them somewhere nice for lunch to make up for the inconvenience. Sophia came back and stood in the doorway, just staring at me with that look, tight-lipped, eyes sharp, but she did not say a word. Ava saw the writing on the wall and finally gave in. She muttered that she needed to get dressed. 20 minutes later, they came downstairs. Neither of them looked thrilled, but it was clear they had accepted I was coming. I had a feeling Sophia's phone call had been to the family planning center, maybe to reschedule the appointment. They probably figured I would be gone that night, and they could just wait me out. But I was not giving them that option. I told them I would drive my own car. I was not about to let them ditch me halfway through the day. On the way, we stopped at a gas station. I took my time, way more than usual. I filled up the tank, checked the oil in the water, wiped down the windshield, even checked the tire pressure. They just sat there, stewing. I knew they were mad, but I did not care. That little delay was part of the plan. When we finally made it to the mall, I parked far out in the lot, so we would have a decent walk to the entrance. Once we got inside, I kept my distance but stayed close enough so they knew I was still around. They were not enjoying themselves. That much was obvious. Most of the time they were whispering, shooting frustrated glances at each other, and just going through the motions. Sure, they bought a few things, but it felt forced, like they were trying to make it look like a normal shopping trip. I did not care what they picked out. The important part was that the clock had run out. The time for that appointment had passed, and now Ava would have to book it again. I was not trying to stop her from doing what she wanted. That was never the point. I just wanted to throw a wrench in the works, to feel like I still had some control in all of this. Around noon, we met back up in the center of the mall, just like we had agreed. We grabbed lunch at the Olive Garden. Nobody said much. Afterward, we drove back to the house. The ride was tense, filled with silence and thick with anger. I could tell both of them were furious, but at that point, I honestly did not care. For the first time in what felt like forever, I actually felt like I had the upper hand. When we got back to the house, I grabbed a cold beer from the fridge, sank into the couch, and let out a long, satisfied breath. For once, things felt like they were going my way. A couple of hours later, Bruce came dragging through the front door. Before he could even set his keys down, Sophia tore into him. She laid into him hard, chewing him out for a good 30 minutes, maybe more. I stayed out of it, just listening from the couch as she let him have it. When she was finally done, Bruce slipped out of the house without saying a word and disappeared until it was time for supper. That evening, after the dishes were washed and the kitchen was clean, I asked Ava if we could talk for a minute in private. I suggested we step into the kitchen. Sophia gave me a dirty look, but did not say anything, and the two of them headed into the living room together. Ava was clearly still steaming from everything that had gone down earlier in the day. I could see it in her eyes. She was not going to be easy to talk to, but I was ready for that. I did not waste time. I told her straight out, again, that I wanted her to leave her job and cut all ties with Peter Miller. Her whole body tensed, and her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. The look on her face was pure fury, like she was holding herself back from slapping me across the table. She told me she was sick of hearing it. Said she had already told me a dozen times that she was not going to quit and that I needed to stop bringing it up. Ava said I knew her answer, and it was not going to change. Then she gave me an ultimatum, either drop it right there or get out. I stayed calm. Instead of backing down, I reached into the manila folder I had brought with me and pulled out a legal-sized envelope. Inside were divorce papers. I looked her in the eye and said, Ava, I have asked you at least 10 times over the last couple of months to end this. Every single time, you've told me no. So here it is. I slid the envelope across the table. I told her she was welcome to have a lawyer go over everything if she wanted, but I was done sitting around waiting for her to choose. I had even included a stamped and addressed envelope so she could just sign and mail the papers back if she wanted to. Ava's face contorted with anger. She leaned forward, voice low and bitter, and said I could not divorce her just because I did not like her job or her friendship with someone like Peter. She insisted that there had to be actual grounds for divorce, and as far as she was concerned, I did not have any. She told me to go home and get my head straight. Reminded me she was still my wife, and said there was no way she was going to give up her home or her family just because I was jealous of where she worked. I waited a moment, then calmly reached back into the folder. This time, I pulled out a handful of photographs, 6 in total, and laid them out on the table one by one. Each one showed her and Peter in various compromising positions, the kind that left nothing up to interpretation. Then I looked her dead in the eye and asked, "Is that enough grounds for you?" Her face went ghost white. For a second, I thought she might pass out right there at the table. But instead of apologizing or showing even an ounce of regret, she exploded. She started shouting at me to stop putting the photos in front of her. She accused me of spying on her, called me all sorts of things sneaky, twisted, perverted. She said I made her sick. She was furious I had not confronted her earlier and instead gathered all this proof like some kind of investigator. That was when my phone rang. It was my dad, letting me know he was about 10 minutes away and had Ava's belongings in his truck. I ended the call and looked back at her. She was still fuming, pacing around the kitchen like a storm cloud. She asked who it was. I told her, calm as ever, that my dad was bringing her stuff over to Sophia's. I let her know I had already changed the locks back home, and that if there was anything she forgot, she could tell me and I would grab it for her. She stared at me, speechless, as I handed her the title to her car. I had already signed it over. Then I gave her another envelope, This one had half of the money from our joint accounts, about $200 in cash. I explained the arrangement I had worked out. She would have visitation with the kids once a week, with a possible overnight stay once a month, but only if she signed a notarized statement confirming the affair. I told her I also had a DVD from May 10th. It was taken at the Scandia Motel, Peter's little hideout. The recording was 2 hours long and showed everything that was in the photos, and then some. I gathered up the pictures from the table and told her, plain and simple, that I had not taken them myself. I was not that invested in the details of her relationship with Peter. What I could not live with was the lying. That is what really tore me up. Then, for the final piece, I pulled out the last item from my folder, a little safety pin. I slid it across the table and told her that for the past 2 months, I had been using it to poke holes in all the condoms she had been going through. I said, "You burned through 48 of those in just 2 weeks. That's a hell of a lot more than I ever thought you would need." Her face turned crimson. She could not believe what she was hearing. She called me a miserable weasel and said that what I had done was the lowest, dirtiest thing she had ever heard of. But I did not flinch. I told her the most despicable thing was cheating on your husband behind his back. I admitted I might have been foolish to stay as long as I did, but she was the one who threw away our marriage. I stood up and told her I had to go. My dad was pulling into the driveway. As I reached for the envelope, I looked at her one last time and said, "You still have not apologized." Not once. Not even a hint of regret. Then I wished her well with her upcoming appointment. I made sure to remind her it was scheduled for Monday. That was the moment she finally broke down. Ava started sobbing right as I stepped out of the room. Sophia came running in to comfort her, arms wrapped around her like she could hold all the pieces together. Bruce followed me out onto the porch, his face full of confusion and concern. He looked at me, shaking his head, and said I was making a huge mistake by walking away from 14 years of marriage over what he called a misunderstanding. I stared him down and asked one simple question. If it was all just a mix-up, why had Ava come down here to visit him and Sophia in the first place? Bruce dropped his eyes to the ground. He looked like a man who had been caught dead to rights and did not know what to say. After a few seconds, he quietly muttered an apology and offered to help finish unloading the truck. We got it all done in about 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Ava stayed in the kitchen, crying like her world had ended. But to me, her tears didn't matter anymore. That ship had sailed. She had chances to make it right, and she let every one of them slip through her fingers. The following week, both Ava and Peter were let go from Liberty Insurance. Ava would not sign the affidavit Olivia's attorney had asked for, but my lawyer told me we were on solid ground without it. After that night, Ava vanished from my life. No phone calls. No messages. Not even a visit to see the kids. Funny thing is, they did not really seem to miss her. They were growing close to Olivia, and the time we spent together as a blended family brought something back into our lives that had been missing for a long time. There was no talk of romance between Olivia and me back then. We were both just trying to survive our divorces and give our kids a stable home. Over time, though, I found myself learning everything there was to know about koi fish. I never thought I would care about something like that, but I found peace in it. I soaked up every moment like it was something special. For months later, the divorces were finally wrapped up. Ava did not put up a fight. Peter, on the other hand, went down swinging. He lost the house, the investments, and even had to pay Olivia a sizable amount in monthly alimony. He walked out of that courtroom looking like a ghost. A few days before Christmas, Ava showed up at the house with presents for the kids. I chose to keep things civil, didn't want to ruin the holidays for the little ones. She stayed for a couple of hours, acting like a caring mother, and then left just as quietly as she had arrived. We never brought up the affair or the divorce. It was like none of it had ever happened. When she walked out the door, I felt something inside me let go. Closure, I guess. The house went up for sale, and 2 months later, I moved in with Olivia. Peter had taken a job out in Des Moines, and Ava had followed him there. Funny enough, about 4 months later, he disappeared, just vanished into thin air. Did not even tell Ava where he was headed. She ended up moving back in with Sophia, who was also dealing with her own marriage falling apart. Bruce had taken a job working on the Alaskan pipeline and mailed Sophia the divorce papers. Those two sisters clung to each other after being left behind by the men they thought they could count on. Meanwhile, life with Olivia just kept getting better. We were comfortable, steady. She treated my kids like her own, and they adored her right back. We spent every free minute together, and by June, we were already planning our wedding. The dust had settled from the chaos of our past lives, and we were finally breathing easy again. Now, As for Peter, the man Ava gave everything up for, he did not end up too lucky. Word spread that not long after he went missing, he got jumped outside one of his regular bars. They beat him pretty bad, busted 5 ribs, shattered both kneecaps, knocked out a bunch of teeth. He even lost a testicle in the attack. Karma has a funny way of catching up with folks like him. Olivia and I kept building our new life, step by step. The kids and I got really into koi ponds, spent hours watching the fish swim around the backyard. That peaceful, quiet time meant more than I can explain. It finally felt like we had made it. No more lies. No more secrets. Just the calm joy of being with people who loved and respected one another. Then one day, Olivia surprised me. She showed me a gorgeous villa she had bought nearby with money she had saved before selling her business. It had a big pool out back, perfect for hot summer afternoons. And tucked away in the garage was something I had not seen in years, my old Jaguar XK140. She had kept it hidden all this time. Said she wanted to save it for the right moment. We planned to take it for a spin down the coast soon, maybe stop in at that little French restaurant we used to love. Just the 3 of us, me, Olivia, and that beautiful car celebrating how far we had come. And as for Ava, last I heard, she was still living with Sophia, trying to rebuild her life after Peter's betrayal. But that is not my concern anymore. That chapter is closed. I have moved on. Olivia and I are starting something new, something solid. We are looking ahead, not back.